Hey guys, welcome back to The Bright Side. Macy here, the Bright Side Girl, and today we're going to be doing some food book recommendations. In case you somehow missed it, I will link the announcement for the next round of Randomathon, which is my readathon that changes themes every time we do a round. This is the second round for this year, and this second round is themed all around books with food, food in the context, food in the title, food on the cover. The readathon is going to be running Monday, April 8th through Sunday, April 21st, so a full 2 weeks. I am beyond excited for this theme. I don't know if you can tell. This is kind of more of a summery shirt, but we've got some lemons and some popsicles on here. Some Toy Story people as well. I got my lemon earrings. I am ready to give you a lot of recommendations. So the first half of this video is going to be books that have some sort of food themed item on the cover. That does not mean that they have a large food element in the actual book itself. You can kind of do the readathon one of three ways. You can do it with books that all heavily feature food. You can do it with books that have a food name in the title or on the cover, even if they're not featuring food, or you can do a combination of the two. I will probably mostly be reading books that have a heavy food themed element in the story, just because I like to really dive into a theme, but I do have a couple that have food in the title that I don't think have to do with the food themselves that I'll be reading as well. This first section is going to be books that have food in the title or on the cover, but not necessarily in the contents, and then we'll talk about books that have a heavy food theme on the second half. I hope all of this makes sense. Alright, first up is Mirror Mirror by Gregory Maguire. I never thought I would start off a video recommending Gregory Maguire. He's kind of a strange author. He writes adult fairy tales, and I don't always love them. I did enjoy this one, but they do have some strange content. They kind of have some weird vibes about them. He is the author of Wicked, which I did enjoy Wicked the book, but you have to totally separate it from the musical because it is very different in tone and story. He has some of the most beautiful book covers though. So this one is a Snow White retelling. Again, this is an adult read, and in this one, I don't know if you can tell, but she is eating an apple. Has this really cool cover. Obviously, her eating an apple is going to be big in any Snow White retelling, so you could kind of count those if you wanted to. I don't really want to say too much about this, but it's an adult fairy tale retelling, so if you want a retelling that's a little bit more on the mature side and a little bit shorter, this is a good one to check out. Going a completely different level, we have Drink, Slay, Love. This is a YA vampire novel, so she's drinking some blood, so we're going to count this as food, even though that's a little on the morbid side. This is a absolutely wild and fun book. In this one we have Pearl, and she is a vampire, and her family just live in the normal world, and one day she gets stabbed in the heart by a unicorn, and it gives her the ability to walk around during the day. When her family finds out about this, they plan to incorporate her into high school and use her to kind of gather food for them via the high school students. So she enrolls in the high school. Normally she has a very cold, non-empathetic demeanor, but she's finding with this new stabbing of the unicorn that she may be getting some more human-like feelings. She starts to make friends and fall in love, and this is just a wild, fun YA read. Definitely a little bit on the silly side, but I so enjoyed this one, and it is a standalone. Next, we have Why We Broke Up by Daniel Hadler and Maria Kalman. I don't think I've ever talked about this book on my channel. So this is a young adult standalone contemporary novel. We have a little teacup, so we'll count that for the food category. This is such a unique book. So in this one, you are getting the story of Min and Ed's breakup told in reverse and told through a box of items. Min gives Ed this box of items that she has collected throughout their relationship, and you get to kind of scroll through and open the box. It has full illustrations throughout this entire thing, and you start off with different things. So this is like a ticket, and she'll be like, this is a ticket from the first movie we ever saw, and then she'll just talk about the day that they saw the movie, and then maybe like little red flags she saw and different things. It's a little bit on the heartbreaking side, but it's done so uniquely, and I don't see anybody talking about it. It's such a really cool read and experience. Again, not a food element, but it has that teacup on there, so I'll let you count it if you want. Next, we have Tell Me Something Real by Kala Devlin. So this one has some peaches on the cover. So in this one, you're following three sisters. They are beautiful girls, but they're also known as like the monsters of the neighborhood. Their mother has leukemia, and so they depend on each other more than they do their parents to survive and to grow. At first I didn't want to read this one because I don't love cancer illness journeys in books, but this one has a really unique twist that was quite surprising and intense, and it's not really a thriller, but it's just such a unique read. I really recommend it. Again, we don't have a food element in here, but you're just following these three sisters as they're kind of dealing with their mother's illness and then uncovering secrets about the family. So I really enjoyed this one. Next up, we have House of Salt and Sorrow. I do own a copy of this book. I'm just not sure where it is right now. I've got like a chaotic mess happening. This is one that just has salt in the title, so I'll let you count this for the readathon. One of my favorite books of all time. This one and the second book is so good. So this is a young adult fantasy mystery, mild horror, just a touch of spookiness. This is also a 12 Dancing Princess retelling. If you're not familiar with that story, there are 12 princesses and they find this kind of magical portal where they get to go dancing every night. And in the morning when they come back, their shoes are torn to shreds and the king cannot figure out where they are going, how they're getting there. So he hires different people to come and try and figure out the mystery. So that's kind of a loose description. And so this is a twist on that story, but we have a like seaside castle, some ocean lore in here, and this is really good. So it has a little bit of like mermaid vibes, but without the mermaids. And because of that salt title, you can read it for the readathon if you want. Okay, next we have This Vicious Grace. Now the US cover works a little bit better because this cover I don't think has any lemons on it. This is the Fairy Loot edition though, so we've got some lemons in here. We've got some lemons on the end pages, but the original cover has a lot more lemon vibes. It goes well with my outfit today. I actually just recently reread this to read the second book in the series, and I really love this duology. So in this one we do have a tiny bit of food elements as well, because we kind of have this like Italian fantasy vibes. It's a young adult fantasy with a tiny bit of romance in it. We have the Fenestra, and she is guarded to take care of this island, and she's supposed to kind of match up with a suitor. She will enhance his powers because there's lots of different powers in this world, but every time they try to match her with someone, whenever she touches him, he dies, and she's killed like 3 or 4 suitors, and the people in charge are kind of trying to figure out what to do about this. She winds up having an assassination attempt happening to her and hiring this kind of snarky misfit bodyguard, and it's just a really fun fantasy duology. So this is a good one to start if you want something that's not super food focused. Now all of the rest of these are going to have more of a food element in the actual story. First of all, we're going to talk about 2 nonfictions I had to mention in here, but Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert, still one of my favorite books that I have ever read. It reads very much like a regular novel. It doesn't really read like a nonfiction, even though it's kind of a memoir. Her storytelling ability is just so good. You're following Elizabeth as she has gone through a divorce and just really had her life fall apart, and she decides to go on this like soul-searching journey, and she goes to Italy where she basically just eats a lot. I believe she goes to India where she is praying and meditating a lot, and then she goes one more place. I can't remember the last place, maybe Thailand, and there she kind of winds up falling in love. It's such a great story. I did this one on audio. She narrates the book herself. She is a fabulous narrator. This is an oldie but a goodie. If you haven't tried it and you want to try a nonfiction, this is such a good one because it just reads like a normal storybook as you're just kind of uncovering her life, and it's just about like self-discovery, but in a really beautifully told way. And the first part where she's in Italy and she's just eating pizza nonstop make you super hungry. It's fabulous. The next nonfiction is The Drunken Botanist by Amy Stewart. So I physically read this one a few years ago and I want to read it again via audio, but I would highly recommend physically reading this. So Amy Stewart, I believe, used to work for National Geographic. She is an amazing storyteller. We're learning about the plants that create the world's greatest drinks. Now, I am not a big drinker. I hardly ever drink alcohol. It's kind of funny because Jeff and I have been really into discovering like speakeasies, but we like hardly ever drink. So I try to find ones that have like mocktails and different things. However, learning about the way that like alcohol came to be is really fascinating, and she tells this in such a good way. Like, this book actually made me laugh. She'll talk about like agave, and then she'll talk about like where it started, how we found out about it, how we used to make the alcohol, but she'll literally talk about the plant itself. And like in one of them she'll talk about how the mother plant consumes the father plant with a vicious vengeance, and she's just a really great storyteller. So it's just such a fun read. It's so weird and not something I feel like a lot of people would think they would enjoy, but I absolutely loved it. I really want to read her other books as well. I also liked learning that most of the alcohol we consumed originally started off as regular fermentation, which in my regular life is a big thing. I make sourdough, I do kombucha, I work for my mom's company, and we talk all about probiotic foods and good bacteria, and originally all of our alcohol was fermented in this live probiotic way before we started super distilling it and pasteurizing it and filtering it. It was all like live and actually had good bacteria in it, so it was a lot healthier, of course, back in the day. So I found that super fascinating as well, but I just really love this one. I had a really good time with it. All right, now into the fiction reads. Okay, I never want to leave obvious ones off the list because I know there's like a lot of younger viewers that watch my channel as well, and maybe they haven't read them, so we're going to talk about some things. So I had to mention The Hunger Games. Obviously, we have hunger in the title, and while the center of this book is not based around food, it kind of is, because we're in this society where you have to work hard to survive, and there are some kind of food elements in this book. So in this book, in the future, we are in the city of Panem, and in this world, it's got a very dystopian universe where there are 12 kids chosen from different factions, and they all have to compete in the Hunger Game. And whoever survives is the winner, and they get like kind of taken care of for life, but they have to kill all the other participants, and they're just these young like teenage kids, and so it's kind of this dreaded thing, but it's also broadcast on live TV. That's the gist of the story. I've never had to describe the Hunger Games before like in detail, but most of you know what this book is about. But if you have not started this series yet, now would be a good time, especially if you want to read something, again, not overly food focused, but we have that hunger in the title. All right, Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, one of my favorite food books of all time. This one's by T. Kingfisher. Now, if you've read other T. Kingfishers, I have not, but I know that a lot of the other books that she writes are darker and have harder hitting topics. This one is not. This one is a cozy fantasy, but also has some fun elements and is technically a murder mystery. It is so adorable and lovely. So you are following 14-year-old Mona. She is not like the other wizards guarded with defending her city. She can't control lightning or speak to water, and her familiar is a sourdough starter. Her magic only works on bread, and she has a comfortable life in her aunt's bakery making gingerbread men dance. But Mona's life is turned upside down when she finds a dead body on the bakery floor. An assistant is stalking the streets of Mona's city, but Mona's life is turned upside down when she finds a dead body on the bakery floor. This one has that murder element, but it's not a dark read. It's very, very cozy and fun, but also still has some action in here, and it's really, really good. Like, I gave this one 5 stars, I think, in 2022. It was in my top 10. Can't recommend it enough. It's so much fun. I make sourdough bread, so I liked it a little bit more because of that, but it's an amazing read. Highly recommend for the readathon. I love creating different readathon themes like this because it makes me scour my shelves for different options and talk about a lot of books that I don't normally talk about, so that's very fun. All right, we have Garden Spells by Sarah Addison Allen. I think almost all of Sarah Addison Allen's books will work for this readathon. A lot of them have a food element. I read this one because it's one of my mom's favorite books, and it did not disappoint. So we have some apples on the cover, but this one is so magical. So in a garden surrounded by a tall fence, tucked away behind a small quiet house in the smallest of towns, is an apple tree that is rumored to bear a special sort of fruit. The Waverleys have always been a curious family, endowed with peculiar gifts that make them outsiders even in their own home of Bascom, North Carolina. Even their garden has a reputation, famous for its feisty apple tree that bears prophetic fruit and its edible flowers imbued with special powers. Generations of Waverleys tended this garden, and their history was in the soil, but so were their futures. A successful caterer, Claire Waverley prepares dishes made with mystical plants, from the nasturtiums that aid in keeping secrets and the pansies that make children thoughtful, to the snapdragons intended to discourage the attentions of her amorous neighbor. Meanwhile, her elderly cousin Evanel is known for distributing unexpected gifts whose uses become uncannily clear upon receiving. They are the last Waverleys except for Claire's rebellious sister, Sydney, who fled the Bascom the moment that she could. So in this one we have kind of practical magic vibes. It's a little bit lighter than practical magic. I haven't read the book, but compared to the movie. And she does a lot of baking and cooking for different people because that's her job. And we talk a lot about food and the magic that's embedded in the food, and it is so delicious. We have a little bit of darker elements in here too because one of the sisters is kind of running away from a dark past. But overall, this is just like a cozy, really good read. It's just so beautifully written, and I absolutely loved it. All right, Sourdough by Robin Sloan, another of my all-time favorites, another one about sourdough, but this one has kind of like a weird sci-fi element to it. This is a short book. It's so amazing. We're following Lois Clary. She is a software programmer at General Dexterity, a robotics company with the typical San Franciscan world-changing ambition. She codes all day and collapses all night, and her human contact is limited to two brothers who run the neighborhood hole in the wall from which she orders and savors dinner from every evening. Then disaster occurs. Visa issues and the brothers close up shop fast, and they have one last delivery for Lois. Their culture, the sourdough starter brought from afar to bake their bread. She must keep it alive, and they tell her to feed it daily, play it music, and please, please learn to bake with it. So she becomes obsessed. I think they also sell faux. So they sell faux and this fresh sourdough bread, and she starts to learn how to make sourdough bread. But then the sourdough starter kind of has like a mind of its own. We've got a little bit of like weird elements in here, so it's got a little bit of a strangeness to it, but I loved this one so much. I love a little bit of weird. We talk so much about bread. You are going to want to go in your backyard and learn to make a bread making oven and make all of the bread after you read this book. It is so good. Absolutely loved it. Next, we have Deal with an Elf King by Elise Kova. This is a young adult fantasy romance. This one is more of a clean romance. There's very little to no spice in here, which is personally what I prefer. I absolutely loved this one. This is the start of her Married to Magic series, but these all work as standalone. So this is the first one. In this one, 3,000 years ago, humans were hunted by powerful races with wild magic until the treaties were formed. Now, for centuries, the elves have taken a young woman from Luella's village to be their human queen. To be chosen is seen as a mark of death by the townsfolk. A mark 19-year-old Luella is grateful to have escaped as a girl. Instead, she has dedicated her life to studying herbology and becoming the town's only healer. That is until the Elf King unexpectedly arrives for her. In this one, she's working more with herbs and healing people, but I believe she's cooking as well. And herbs technically can count for food as well. So we have some of that kind of magical coziness as well, but we also have like a full plot with the Elf King coming and the romance. And this was just really, really great if you want like a fantasy element. Next, we have Daisy Darker by Alison Feeney. So this is a murder mystery thriller, kind of a retelling of And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. I have mixed feelings about Alice Feeney, but this is one of the ones that I really enjoyed. This is an adult read. In this one, after years of avoiding one another, Daisy Darker's entire family is assembling for Nana's birthday party in Nana's crumbling Gothic house on a tiny tidal island. They're finally back together one last time. When the tide comes in, they will be cut off from the rest of the world for 8 hours. The family arrives, each of them harboring secrets. Then at the stroke of midnight, as a storm rages, Nana is found dead. An hour later, the next family member follows. Trapped on an island where someone is killing them one by one, the Darkers must reckon with their present mystery as well as their past secrets before the tide goes out and all is revealed. So the reason I have this one on here is because it is actually set on Halloween, which is the grandma's birthday, and we kind of go back and forth in time between present and past. And one thing that the grandma would do is she would make food or have people make food themed all around candy, and literally like pasta with like candy sauce, but it all sounded really good. Even though that sounds weird, like the way she described it made you want to try all of these different dishes. It wasn't overly heavily a theme in here, but she did talk about it enough that it made me kind of think of food when I thought of this one. So if you want something, again, with a very minor food element, and you're looking for something a tiny bit spooky and a little bit darker, this is a really good one. The exact opposite side, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, one that I'll be recommending forever. First of all, this is the UK edition, which has mushrooms on it. But in this book, we are following Emily. She's a curmudgeon-y type professor that is looking to study and write her encyclopedia of the Fae and different types of fairies. She winds up going to this small town to do research and kind of infiltrating their area, and they're not too thrilled about having her there, but they're not necessarily against it. You're getting told the story through her journal entries. This one has a tiny bit of a slower start, but it is the coziest, most delightful, sweet little book in the world. It has a wonderful little romance in here. This is an adult book, but there's no spice in the romance. Again, which is personally what I prefer. It is so sweet and adorable, and they talk a lot about like tea time, different types of food, and different things that they're making in this little cabin. Has the coziest vibes. So this one kind of made me hungry while reading it, and so did the second one, so I wanted to include it in here because it just has all those cozy elements, but it's not boring in any way. I really, really loved it. Back to a more darker read, Shades of Rust and Ruin by A.G. Howard. So this is the first in a duology. The second book comes out this year, and I am so excited because this cliffhanger was brutal. I was really shocked. I love A.G. Howard's writing. Normally she does retellings, and this is kind of a retelling of The Goblin King, which I'm not super familiar with, and it's got some steampunk vibes. It's so unique. So in this one, we're following Phoenix Nix Loring, and she knows her family is under a Halloween curse. When she was 3, her parents tragically died on October 31st. 11 years later, her twin sister Lark suffered a similar fate. Ever since, Nix has been battling survivor's guilt, and she can't even find comfort in Clary, Lark's boyfriend, and the one person who understands her pain, because Nix's hidden feelings for him go far beyond friendship. All that remains are her sketches, where she finds solace among the goblins and fairies in her imaginary world of Mystical. When her depression starts affecting her ability to see color, Nix all but gives up on her art until her uncle goes missing on Halloween Day. Hot on his trail, Nix and Clary step through a portal, becoming trapped inside a decaying version of their town filled with Nix's sketches come to life. Now, the reason I have included this one is because Nix's uncle runs like a Halloween themed cafe, and he kind of has these like magical food dishes. So they talk about different types of like baked goods that they're making that kind of have magicalness to them, and I really like that. Again, not overly heavy, but they talked about it enough that it kind of ingrained itself in my brain. This is such a magical, unique book, and I really loved it. Hungry by H.A. Swain. I have been wanting to recommend this one to you guys for so long, but I couldn't find any categories to put it in. This is a YA dystopian read. It is definitely on the slightly silly, almost ridiculous side, but it still somehow totally works. I really enjoyed it. I do tend to really enjoy dystopian books, but in this one, Thalia's world, there is no more food and no need for food as everyone takes medication to ward off hunger. Her parents both work for the company that developed the drugs society consumes to stave off any food craving, and they live a life of privilege as a result. When Thalia meets a boy who's part of an underground movement to bring food back, she realizes there's an entire world outside of her own. She also starts to feel hunger, and so does the boy. Are the meds not working any longer? Together they set out to find the only thing that will quell their hunger, real food, and it's a journey that will change everything for Thalia. Might be the perfect read for the readathon. Her name is also Thalia Apple, which I thought was kind of like funny and good. This one had a really good ending. It's a standalone. They talk a ton about food because they don't have any in their world, and they describe like what it smells like and different types of things. The grandparents in this world remember real food, so they talk about it a lot, and I just really enjoyed it. It's very unique and absolutely perfect for the readathon. Next we have Belladonna by Adeline Grace. This one has a very light food element. So in this one we're following Belladonna, and she seems to be followed around by death. It feels like everywhere she goes, people around her die, and she can kind of feel death, and she kind of wants him to stay away from her. She gets sent to live with like her distant cousins in this Gothic manor, and their mother has just passed away. They're all kind of in a state of grief, and she kind of feels like maybe something nefarious happened to the mother. They said it was an illness, but she's getting the vibe that something else is going on, and she kind of wants to unsolve this mystery. Loose description, great romance in here, tiny bit of spice, the perfect amount that I enjoy. We have Death as a main character, which was really fun and something I really like apparently. The reason I have this one on here is that they have a lot of tea parties, and I don't think they talk a crazy amount about food, but they do mention it, and she's also working with like belladonna berries, which are technically poisonous, but there is some consuming of them and different things. So this one will work, and I'm giving you an excuse to read it because it's one of my favorite series ever. Another one that does have a little bit of a slower start, and another one that I think is better on audiobook. I have not physically read it, but I think because the narrator was so good, it helped with those slightly slower parts in the beginning. So if you can do it that way, I recommend it. But either way, if you like kind of like Gothic Victorian reads with a little bit of mystery and a tiny bit of spookiness, this is a great one. We have Sweetly by Jackson Pierce. Now, this is part of a fairy tale retelling series by Jackson Pierce. The first book is Sisters Red. I do recommend that you read that one first, so if you have time, squeeze it in, because while these all do follow different fairy tales and different characters, the world ties together really well, and there are like little Easter eggs in the previous books that tie into the next book, so I do recommend reading them in order. But this one is a haunted Hansel and Gretel retelling, and it is fabulous. They're all so good. So as a child, Gretchen's twin sister was taken by a witch in the woods, and ever since, Gretchen and her brother Ansel have felt the long branches of the witch's forest threatening to make them disappear too. Years later, when their stepmother casts Gretchen and Ansel out, they find themselves in sleepy Live Oak, South Carolina. They're invited to stay with Sophia Kelly, a beautiful candy maker who molds sugary magic, coveted treats that creates confidence, bravery, and passion. Life seems idyllic, and Gretchen and Ansel gradually forget their haunted past until Gretchen meets handsome local outcast Samuel. He tells her the witch isn't gone, it's lurking in the forest, preying on girls after Live Oak's infamous chocolate festival every year. So we have that candy maker, Hansel and Gretel element. There's a lot to do with candy making and the chocolate festival, and it is so good. It's just a deliciously described book. I absolutely loved the writing style, and another great one. Time for another weird one, The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake by Amy Bender. This is for those of you that like a little bit of weird, a little bit of mind bending, and some beautiful writing. This is an adult novel. On the eve of her 9th birthday, unassuming Rose Eldstein bites into her mother's homemade lemon chocolate cake and discovers she has a magical gift. She can taste her mother's emotions in the slice. She discovers this gift to her horror, for her mother, her cheerful, good with crafts, can-do mother, tastes of despair and desperation. Suddenly, and for the rest of her life, food becomes a peril and a threat to Rose. Anything can be revealed at any meal. She can't eat her brother Joseph's toast. A cookie at the local bakery is laced with rage, and grape jelly is packed with acidic resentment. Rose's gift forces her to confront the secret knowledge all families keep hidden. Truth about her mother's life outside the home, her father's strange detachment, and Joseph's clash with the world. That is just a loose description. It is so good and unique and almost hard to follow, but in the best way, and it just totally took me by surprise, and I absolutely loved it. Next, we have Legends and Lattes by Travis Beldry. This one was just a 3-star for me, but I feel like it might have been the time that I read it more than the book's fault itself. This is an adult cozy fantasy about an ogre or an org that wants to open a coffee shop in this fantasy world where coffee shops don't really exist, and it's mostly very low stakes. She's kind of avoiding her life of like war and battle, and there's a lot to do with coffee and hiring people to do baked goods and kind of figuring out how to do a coffee shop in this fantasy world. It's very cozy and sweet, and I feel like it's one I need to reread because it's something that I should really love, and I feel like I might have just read it at the wrong time because it does have very low stakes, but this is well beloved and a great one for the readathon. Next, we have The Vine Witch. This is an adult fantasy, a little bit of romance in here. It kind of seems like it's going to be a super spicy read at first, but it is not really at all. It's more about the magic and the fantasy than it is the romance, but it is in there. So just a warning, depending on what you prefer. This one is basically about a witch whose family originally ran this winery, and they used their magic to help the grapes through bad weather and disease, and she gets separated from her family's winery and winds up having to come back years later, and there's a different man running it, and he is really struggling to get this winery going, and she's trying to convince him that magic is real and that she should help him. So again, we have those cozy elements, but there's a lot of magic in here, and it's not entirely low stakes, so I really enjoyed this one. We talk a lot about wine and food, and the atmosphere is really, really good, so this would be a good one to add to your list. Next, we have a graphic novel, and that is Garlic and the Witch. This is a really cute young adult, or might even be a middle grade graphic novel. It's about a clove of garlic that is brought to life by this witch who brought together a bunch of vegetables in her garden, and they kind of live this cozy, cute life. One day, Garlic is assigned the task to go and visit the local vampire and kind of unsolve a mystery, and she is very scared, she is very anxious, and there's just this really cute story about this witch and this garlic and this vampire, and it's really, really fun. I did not really like the second one very much at all, but I really liked this first book. The art is really, really fun, and this would be a great one if you're looking for a graphic novel. Okay, you guys, I think that is enough recommendations for now. Let me know if any of these books sound good to you. If you have any more recommendations, I have a huge TBR list. I have a food-themed book haul coming out very, very soon that has some different recommendations. These are all ones that I've read and really enjoyed that I thought would be good for your TBRs. Let me know if you are so excited for this readathon, because I'm really excited. I've never done a readathon like this before, and I'm just really pumped to do all of the things. I've got some fun ideas planned for the vlog. Make sure you check out everything in the description because I have lots of links for the playlist and the graphics and all the stuff that we normally do for the readathons. It's coming up really, really quickly, so get your stuff ready to go. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at The Bright Side Girl because I'll be posting a lot on there as well, and I'll see you guys next time on The Bright Side.